Greetings and welcome to this brief introduction to Plato's dialogue, the Critias. The most famous thing about Plato's Critias is that it is the very first written account of the lost city of Atlantis. If you've ever dreamt of discovering the remains of that ancient civilization, well, this is where it all began. But the story of Atlantis is not the point of the Critias. The real point is to describe ancient Athens, and more specifically a war in which ancient Athens defeated Atlantis. Yet, the dialogue, the Critias, breaks off in mid-sentence, long before the war begins. Now there's no sign that Plato wrote more, or that he died in the middle of writing this dialogue. So how are we to make sense of it? Let's step back to get the overall picture. That means returning to the Timaeus, the dialogue which the Critias immediately follows. At the beginning of the Timaeus, Socrates meets Critias, an Athenian nobleman, Timaeus, a philosopher and statesman from the Italian city of Locri, and Hermocrates, a statesman from the Sicilian city of Syracuse. Socrates says that the day before he had feasted them with an account of the best regime. Now this best regime sounds very like the city described in the first half of the Republic, though here Socrates makes no mention of the rule of the philosopher kings. Socrates says that the three of them promised to repay him with a feast in return, in which they would describe the best city in motion. Now, since the greatest motions of cities is war, they must describe the best city at war. Critias replies that overnight they came up with a plan. He says that he recalled a story that he heard as a boy about ancient Athens 9,000 years before, which he thought remarkably resembled Socrates' best regime. By telling this story, Critias will repay Socrates and praise the goddess Athena, whose great festival is going on right now. So Critias adds then that they decided that Timaeus will speak first, starting from the genesis of the cosmos as a whole and ending at human nature. Then Critias says he will speak next, taking the human beings in those ancient days and identifying them as citizens of Athens. Socrates strongly endorses this plan. So, for the rest of the Timaeus, Timaeus delivers a long speech that tells how God, a divine craftsman, made the visible cosmos in an imitation of an eternal model. This God also made the Olympian gods, who then formed the mortal animals, including human beings. At the beginning of the Critias, Timaeus hands the floor back to Critias to describe the ancient Athenians. And that is what Critias does in the rest of the dialogue, the Critias, which has two main parts. First, he describes ancient Athens, and then its mighty foe, Atlantis. Now, what about Hermocrates? Presumably, once Critias was done identifying ancient Athens as the best city, Hermocrates would have taken over the third and final piece of work, to describe the best city at war. But this Hermocrates, the actual man, not just the character, later in life, as leader of Syracuse, defeated imperial Athens. The result of the plan here, then, in the dialogue, would be that the man from the West, who would one day in the future, in defense of his homeland, give Athens its worst defeat in war, would sing now, in praise of ancient Athens, its greatest success in war, in defense against an imperial enemy from the West. So, if we could imagine that it had been completed, the trilogy of Timaeus, Critias, and Hermocrates would have offered the most complete praise of Athens as the best regime, in speech and in deed, the culmination of the divine plan, the just victor in the greatest war. Even if it had occurred only once in the far-off past, to live as a citizen of the best regime would be a possibility. Yet the Critias breaks off in mid-sentence, and the Hermocrates never appears. This break reminds us of how Critias himself came by his strange tale. Critias says that he got it from his grandfather, also named Critias, who got it from his father Dropides, who got it from his friend Solon, the great legislator and poet, who got it in Egypt from an old priest, who explained that the reason that the Athenians don't know this story about ancient Athens is that there have been many catastrophes that have wiped out the great majority of humankind. One such catastrophe even wiped out ancient Athens and Atlantis. But Solon never wrote down the full story, because when he returned to Athens, he was forced to deal with civil strife instead of spending his time writing. Now, what does this broken history tell us? Far from finding its completion in humankind, the cosmos seems hostile to humankind. Far from being an ordered whole, it seems disordered. The best city may be wiped out by an earthquake. A great poet may be prevented from writing by civil strife. Speeches end in mid-sentence, others never appear. To this grim problem, Critias, our character, offers this solution: the gods. His accounts of Athens and Atlantis both begin with the direct intervention of the gods as founders. The gods, he says, justly allotted the earth to themselves by regions. Hephaestus and Athena produced good men from the Athenian soil. Likewise, Poseidon took as his lot Atlantis and settled there the 5 pairs of twin sons that he had with a mortal woman. And he set this land in order, and he gave his descendants laws. As long as Poseidon's divine nature was strong in his descendants, all their thoughts, Critias says, were true and great. As their divinity faded, they became full of greed. Then Zeus, king of the gods, recognized how wretched this decent race had become, and he sought to punish them so that they would become more moderate. This is where the dialogue, the Critias, breaks off. Seen from this vantage point, what looks like catastrophe serves regeneration. Chance serves order. Order and justice are present from the very beginning with the gods, even if these gods are products of an older, truer, more complete God, one who puts together all things to an end that is most beautiful and best. Through the revolutions of the cosmos, wickedness receives its punishment and virtue its reward, by returning, as Timaeus said, to the form of the condition first and best. So, the Timaeus, the account of the oldest things, period, and the Critias, the account of the oldest regimes, complement one another. This combined account takes the place of the account of the best city in motion. Perhaps this combined account is the account of the best city in motion, at least according to Critias. Thank you for joining this brief introduction to Plato's dialogue, the Critias.